Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You are tuned in to Beyond the Flash, unlocking the potential of constant lighting in photography. Of course, hosted by Westcott as part of our Westcott Wednesday series. And for that, I would like to welcome the man of the hour, Glyn Dewis. Glyn, how's it going?
Really good. How are you?
I'm good now that I got through that intro, and I'm like, good, my work here is done. No
Yeah,
pressure.
yeah, yeah. I know what we are talking about off air, saying, oh, technicals, let's get it going. All right. But yeah, all good so far. But yeah, looking forward to this. I'm really looking forward to this.
No, likewise. I mean, look, we both probably started with flashes and strobes in
Yeah.
that world, and it's like you kind of cut your teeth on the difficult stuff. And
Yeah, yeah.
now kids these days, they got it so easy. Constant, continuous lighting is like everywhere. It's becoming the mainstream. So
Yeah.
I could wax poetic about the days of struggling through lighting, but I'm going to turn it over to you, the true
Cool.
expert here, and I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A. I will invite everybody who's joining us in the live stream on YouTube. If you do have a question, get it in. We'll make sure we get it asked to Glyn. And Glyn, I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
Will do. Look forward to it. All righty. So yeah, we're going to be going through talking about constant light because this is something that I have started to use over recent times. And when I say recent times, I would say it's probably more this year, sort of going back to the beginning of this year, I kind of took the turn over to it. And it's not something I thought I would ever do. I thought flash was me. Constant light wasn't really something that I did. But as time's gone on, when I experimented with it, it really is. So I want to kind of take you through that. And what I'm going to do with this presentation here is I've got some slides to show you, a couple of videos. I want to show you kind of stuff that I was doing with regular flash. And then I want to show you some examples of stuff that I'm now doing with the constant light. But then I want to bring in something else because it would be very easy for me to sit here and say, I'm using constant light. It's perfect. I love it. It makes life so much easier. But we'd be over. We'd be finished with this live within 5 minutes. I want to kind of give you an idea as to how I work, principles behind how I take portraits. And I'm kind of hoping as I go through that, you'll understand why using constant light is kind of marrying my process. It's sort of real like a match made in heaven for how I work. It's allowing me to sort of do what I do when it comes to taking portraits. And that sounds a bit weird maybe, but you'll see what I mean as I go through this and explain my process. But let me just, I'm going to share my screen. So we'll go to there, make sure there's some sound because I've got some videos for you. We'll click on share screen and then I'll bring up the presentation. So obviously this is the title for it, the Beyond the Flash Constant Lighting Photography. Now, rewinding just a little bit then. So this is the kind of regular flash equipment that I would be using. And one message I do want to get across with this is, even though I'm talking about using constant light, it doesn't mean that I no longer use flash like we've got here, the FJ400, the 200, the speed lights, all that. I still am using those, but it's what's fit for a particular purpose. And again, you'll see what I mean as I go through this. But let me just show you some examples of portraits that I've taken before using constant light. And this is the kind of stuff that I just love to do. And you'll probably see as I go through these examples here, you'll probably see that there is a bit of a pattern to them. And that pattern is that they are controlled environment portraits. There's no, fast movement going on or anything like that. There are a couple of them that are outside. Those are definitely being used using the actual flash, traditional flashes with those. But you can see here, very controlled. And you can imagine taking these was very slow paced. And that's the way I kind of work. I'm not somebody who is, all guns blazing, go, 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 limited time taking portraits. That's not how I work. I do have the luxury of time. However, the constant light thing is irrelevant to that because it does mean that things can get set up very, very quickly. But like I said, these are the traditional flashes that I would be using. And I love these. I absolutely love them. They do exactly what I need them to do. For example, with this kind of picture here, which is a friend of mine, taking a picture of him up in Wales. He's not a farmer. He's just posing as a farmer. I'm not somebody who generally photographs models. But if we look at this picture here, this would have to be done with a traditional flash. Because if we look at the original kind of scene that we've got here, if I pointed the camera towards my friend Simon, this is what the camera would give me if I let the camera decide what it was going to do. It can only, it's not, we all know this, it's not as clever as our eyes. A camera cannot expose for the sky and it cannot perfectly expose for the subject. Your phones can, But hey, that's a different story. But in the camera, this is what we've got to do. We've got to think about, right, what do I want to have exposed for here? The sky, the subject, or whatever. Obviously, with this portrait here assignment, I wanted the sky to be loads of detail. I didn't want it to be a whiteout. So I would need to speed the actual shutter speed of the camera up so that I could get some of that detail back. But then what you've got to do is, once you've got this fast shutter speed, you've then got to use your flash in something called high-speed sync, because it's gone beyond the native sync speed where the flash and the camera can talk together and all that light can fill the sensor and we're all happy. It's gone beyond that. So we need to use technology called high-speed sync. So here you are. Here you can see me here using a modifier here. And the point on that modifier there is the modifier itself is going to knock out some power within that flash. So it needs to be in fairly close. But also, as a side note, this scene here is very, very, there's a lot of cloud in the sky. There's no contrast. That's why I'm using that modifier. And that's one thing I've always kind of been very aware of when it came to flash, something that I learned when I first started out, that when we are, particularly when we're outside, we have to look at our environment. What is the lighting like? And then we match our lighting to that environment. Very often I've seen pictures where we've got like a very hard contrasty scene where the sun's coming through creating hard shadows, and somebody's used a softbox with the actual diffusion material to create nice soft light on the subject, and the two just don't seem to marry. So you need to kind of think about obviously what modifier you're using depending on the environment that you're shooting in. But you can see here, when you combine that flash, that sped up shutter speed to burn down the sky and then involve the flash, you can then expose for the both. So we've got the sky and the subject nicely exposed just there, the picture on the right-hand side. Another example of this, and I wouldn't advise doing this, but this picture here of this female surfer. Here we are on the beach taking the shot. You can see me there. I think this might have been the Sony A1, I think. It's literally had just been released, and I was given this Sony camera to have a bit of a play with, to do some footage, some behind-the-scenes footage using it. And I took it out into the sea, waist high, without any waterproof casing on. But hey, so if we look at the picture here then, where we're kind of like making sure that we know our positions, where we're going to be in the water. We've got the guy there holding the FJ400, Westcott FJ400 up there on a boom arm, like a monopod rather. He's holding that. We're already at positions. But you can see again, out of camera, if I let the camera take the shot, look at the sky, hardly any detail in there. So we would really need to speed the camera up to be able to get some detail in the sky. So again, the high-speed sync is where it comes in. This is why I still love to use traditional flash, because it allows us to create something that ordinarily the camera would not be able to capture. But my thing, again, really my heart is really in doing portraits that really do capture the person's kind of personality and draws out that emotion. And that sounds very cliche, I know, when we're talking about portraits, but this is how it is for me. You know, there's the process I go through, which I'll explain in a moment, that I sort of use to help to get people to relax and be themselves. Because like I said, I don't generally photograph models. I like to photograph, and I'm not going to do that thing with the fingers, but real people, if that makes sense. But these are the kind of pictures that I take. And again, you can look at these and you can hopefully tell that there is certainly a connection going on between me and the person that I'm photographing. And you would imagine as well, I think, that these pictures haven't been rushed. Time has been taken. And that's where using the constant light comes in. And I'm going to really try to do this in such a way that it doesn't sound like a sales pitch. But when you are enthused by something like constant light, like I am now, for me, it kind of feels like the excitement that I had when I first knew how to use flash. That excitement all those years ago, thinking, yes, I'm the daddy, I know how to do this now. It's almost like it's gone full circle. And now I've introduced this new style of lighting. That feeling of excitement is back again. Not that I wasn't enjoying it, but you know what I mean? It's kind of reignited that enthusiasm. And this is the L60B, which I'm using now. We'll talk about more about that in a moment, but these are examples of portraits that I've taken using it. And you're not going to see a difference. That's not what this is about. You're not going to see a difference in these portraits and ones that I've already shown you. However, it's the behind the scenes. It's the process of taking the portraits using constant light that is different. And I've got a couple of videos I'm going to show you, which will show you the behind the scenes of the photo shoots going ahead. And I've done a voiceover where it explains the process and how it feels when I'm doing it. But these pictures here, as an example, then we've got my friend Steve Healy here, where we've got that nice, simple one light kind of setup. We've got that Rembrandt lighting. Now, ordinarily, if I was going to try and set that up, I know, roughly how we can do that quite quickly by positioning the sort of modifier in a certain way. However, nothing beats having a light that is on, so that when you turn that light on, put it into the modifier and you kind of position it, what you see is what you get. There is no mistaking of what you're going to capture. So setting these kind of pictures up here, literally, and no exaggeration, took seconds. It was so incredibly easy to set up because the light was on, the constant light, and what you see is what you get. So let me just play you a short video now, which kind of gives you an overview of how I took these portraits here of my friend Steve using that constant light. For the lighting, I use the L60B from Westcott, which is an LED constant light, and genuinely, I absolutely love it. It might sound a bit daft to say it, but now using constant light instead of a traditional flash type of light, for me, has changed everything. Setup is so much simpler and quicker because what you see is what you get. When you move the light, when you make it brighter, when you change the color temperature, you see it. There's no taking test shots and then checking. You can get it exactly right before you take even one single shot. The L60B is about the size of a fizzy drinks can and very light. And another great thing is that I can use it with all of the modifiers I have, which again are made by Westcott. So for the portrait of Steve, keeping it nice and simple but also classic, I used just one light. The L60B I had at about 30% power, and that I fit into the Westcott 24-inch rapid box switch beauty dish, which, like all of the other rapid box modifiers, has an umbrella type of mechanism, meaning that they are easy to collapse and just one movement to set them up. The light I positioned on a light stand to camera right with it higher than Steve and angled down, also slightly forward of him, as you can see here. Now, when using the constant light, you only really want that to be the light in your pictures, so any other light in the room that isn't contributing to the portrait needs to be turned off. And when you do that, straight away you can see exactly what you have. It's just so incredibly easy to use. Settings, I was shooting at f4 with a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, which is fine as the camera is on a tripod and there's no movement in the portrait. And the ISO was at 1250 to give just enough detail in the dark shadow areas that weren't being lit by the constant light. As I say, setting up was so incredibly easy, again because of using that constant light, and this meant that as I took shots of Steve getting him to change the direction of his head and eyes slightly, everyone else could see exactly what was going on without having to come round and look at the back of the camera. With this setup, what your eyes see is exactly what the camera captures, so no unexpected surprises. And that there is exactly how it is. It was almost laughable. It almost felt like cheating when we were doing this particular photo shoot, that we put that light up in position, turn it on, Steve gets in position, and it's like, bang, you're on the money. And there's no, like I said in the video there, there's no wasted shots. You literally, what you see with your naked eye from behind the camera is exactly what the camera captures. It is just ridiculously simple. So I kind of wish, in a way, that when I was doing this portrait series of these World War II veterans going back pre the COVID times, I really wish that I'd had access to constant light. I probably did have access to it, let's face it. I just didn't think it was something that I would be using. I was used to using the way that I've always done it, which is using the traditional flash. But photographing these people in particular, I think it would have been very advantageous to have used the constant light. And there's one guy later on, which I'll explain, and you'll understand why I say that, because it would have made a huge difference. Even though I was prepared for what happened, having a constant light there anyway, just being part of the course of how I took these portraits, it would have made a huge difference. So what I want to do now is I want to kind of take you through, thinking now that I'm using this constant light, you kind of know what kind of pictures that I like to take. I want to take you through the process of how I actually take them. And as I go through this, I'm really hoping that you can kind of see how using constant light with the way that I do this just makes sense. It would make the whole process so much easier. So this is kind of, I'm going to bring in a presentation I've also kind of got, which I'm going to bring in now. It's called How to Photograph Anyone. So as we go through this, like I say, think about how the constant light would be a real benefit when we're doing this. But also something else I want you to think about as we go through this is to kind of get you involved in this. I know you can't shout at me. You're going to be muted while you're watching this Zoom. But have a think about this. What is a successful portrait? What to you is a successful portrait? Is it something that is the composition, the sharpness, the skin tone, the lighting, or is it the expression, or is it something else? And I know I have my own idea of what I think a successful portrait is to me. It might be different to you, but I'm kind of thinking that maybe as we go through this, if you think it's very different to what I think it is, you might come round to my way of thinking. But here we go. Let's have a look. But before we do that, we'll rewind to when like I said earlier on, I thought I was the daddy. I'd learned how to use flash, traditional flash. This is way back now, no constant light. This was pure flash. And I, like I said, I thought I'd got it. I thought this is it. The world's my oyster now. We can bring it on. I can take any portrait I want to take. And this here is actually my first ever paid job as a portrait photographer. And I remember it clearly. And it's probably the same for you folks. So all those pictures that you've taken, you can look in your portfolio and you can remember absolutely everything about it, where you were, what went right, what went wrong, camera you're using, the flash, all that kind of stuff. Now, when I took this picture here, I was really happy with them. The guy, Tom Colley, who's an up-and-coming actor, he was really happy with them. But if we fast forward to kind of current time, when I look at these now, I'm not so happy. And the reason for that is because I can see by looking at these pictures here, I know where my focus was, and there's no pun intended there, but my focus was on the technicals. That is all I was thinking about, really. I got the guy in front. He was doing his thing. He's an actor. I say, just stand there with the guitar, look all kind of moody. He would do his thing. And all that's going through my head was the technicals, making sure that I get the camera and the flash to trigger and to speak to each other and the right flash power and correct exposure and all that kind of stuff. I thought that was what my job was as the portrait photographer back then. And I thought the person in front of it, well, your job is to kind of make yourself look good and relaxed. Obviously, my opinion of that has changed. But when I look at his expression, the guy there, it just looks like he's staring off into middle distance. There's no connection going on. Is it a portrait, or is it just an example of using lighting? Do you know what I mean? There seems to be no connection. When I first started out in this whole creative industry, I wasn't a photographer. I started out as a retoucher, and I would work for agencies. I was freelance working for agencies, doing all kinds of different work. And I used to love, when I did get the camera, I used to love doing composites. And this is an example of the kind of composite portraits that I would do, where I would photograph people on against a grey, simple, plain paper grey background, and then add texture to it later to make it look like something else. And these two pictures here, perfect examples of what I used to like doing all those years ago. My friend Glenn is the guy wearing the leather jacket there, who I've photographed him as a tough guy. But when we look at it, is he really a tough guy? Or is he a guy just wearing a leather jacket with a fake gun, putting it into the inside of his jacket's front there? When we zoom in, again, look at the expression. It's just looking into middle distance. It's almost like you could go, hello, hello, is there anybody there? And the reason for this, I'm convinced, is because my main thoughts were all to do with the technicals of the photo shoot, making sure that my 3 light setup, because now I was really getting confident using 3 lights, one either side to create that rim lighting going down the side, and then one at the front to fill it in. And I just thought I was, I really got this nailed. The technicals, yes, but the photographer side of me, no, because I was thinking so much about the technicals. Again, look at the expression. Look at the other guy, the expression just stood there. So are these portraits, or are they just photographs? My feeling is that they are photographs. I don't believe, for me, they're not portraits, because they're not capturing any kind of emotion at all. There's no emotion, there's no nothing. In fact, the thing that's really missing is what I mentioned earlier on, connection. They may as well have just been mannequins. That's all they may as well have been, because that's as much life in those mannequins there as there has been in those previous portraits I've just shown you. Because I was thinking purely of the technicals, overwhelmed by the technicals, really, I guess. Another example, this guy here, this is my friend Steve Cook, who's a 4 times kickboxing world champion at 3 different weight categories. This is a portrait that I took at the very first time I met him. I was introduced to him. And again, it's, you know, you do the traditional thing, you know, you're going to photograph a fighter, you photograph him in the ring, you know, you try and make something that's gritty and moody and lots of drama to it. So there's a lot of lighting coming in there, you know, these lights coming in from the top, this top lighting so that you exaggerate the shape of the muscles, creating those shadows within the recesses, like on his chest and on his abs and all that kind of stuff. But we zoom in and we look at the expression. Again, no connection. I might as well not been there. He could be looking straight through me. And if I'm honest, probably the reason that he's looking like that, bless him, I mean, he's a top fella, but the reason he's probably looking like that is boredom. Because the amount of time it took me to set this up back in the day was a long time. And Steve was incredibly patient. But you look at that picture there, which was, I don't know how many lights. I'm guessing 5 different lights all around that particular shot there, where he's looking straight through me. But then you fast forward a bit of time when I've got to know Steve better. Me and him know each other now. And I've done a much simpler portrait of him using just 1 light. Very slow pace, very relaxed. And I'm hoping you can kind of see a difference, especially if I put these pictures here side by side. The left one, the first time we've met him, bored. Glyn's overwhelmed by the technicals. The right-hand one, more confident Glyn. Glyn understands flash now. That's not such a big deal dealing with the technicals, spending more time talking to him. I'm hoping that you can see that those eyes there in the black and white portrait, they're not looking through me. There's much more going on. There's a bit of life going on in those eyes there. And again, that is because of that one word, that magical word, connection. And this is what it's all about when it comes to the photography. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to preach. This is something that I have literally learned for myself in the field by just getting out there and doing this over and over and over again. Because I am somebody who gets very restless if there's a period of time goes by when I'm not doing something. You know, if I haven't captured a portrait in a few days or whatever, I get very, very restless. So I've done a lot of this and I've just kind of learned what works for me when it comes to taking portraits. But, you know, these portraits here, more examples now. These are the examples portraits actually from that veterans portrait series that I mentioned that I was doing pre-COVID. And when you look at these, my hope is that when you see them, that you kind of, the people look relaxed. They look comfortable. They don't look like, you know, they're staring off into middle distance. There is a connection between them and me. The reason I see that in these portraits here is, again, I can remember everything about every single one of these portraits that I took. But the reason for this is that I can remember clearly, although I was using traditional flash at the time of taking these portraits, I was comfortable with it. Don't get me wrong, there's always more to learn. And I think we should always remain open to the fact there is always more to learn and not become too complacent and think that we know it all. But when I was photographing these veterans here, because it was being done in their own homes, you know, this wasn't in the luxury of being in a studio with lots of space. The fact that I'd kept everything simple and stripped it back to basics using 1 light, it meant that I could become very familiar with using that 1 light. It meant that I could become adaptable to where I was taking pictures. You know, I could be in a place where there was lots of space or maybe space where there was hardly any. And I had to really kind of, rather than using a large octabox to create soft light, I would use a smaller softbox to create a soft light, but it would obviously have to be in closer. So it's those kind of things. It gave you the confidence to be able to adapt once you felt comfortable with the technical side of things. But there was always that concern when you're doing this kind of stuff here that, you know, will it trigger fine? Will there be any interference? Will the people be okay with the flash? Because some people seem to have this superpower where they can blink just at the moment that flash goes off. And I seem to find these people with this superpower. But again, more examples just here. The guy there on the left, you can see with that sort of chest full of medals there. He's sadly no longer with us, but I always remember his nickname was Harry the Bucket, because he always carried a bucket around with him for a charity that he used to raise funds for veterans for. And wherever you saw him, he always had his bucket and he was shaking those pennies in there. Wonderful man. And the lady next to him there, she's not a veteran. That's my best friend, Dave Clayton's mom, who wanted a picture in the same style. So things that I learned once I'd start to get comfortable with this, and it was a long process. Don't get me wrong. When you're sort of getting very, very comfortable with the flash, so that you can not just take a picture, that you become so comfortable that you can actually take a portrait. And to me, there is a huge difference between taking a picture of somebody or photograph of somebody and taking a portrait of somebody. And one of the things that I learned once I'd become comfortable with the technicals, like I said, which was a long process, was to slow down. And the process was to sort of, the old saying of rather, talk more and take fewer photographs. It used to be that I would be all excited about taking a portrait. I'd go out and that's all I would be thinking about. And I'd just kind of go through the whole process straight away. Whereas really, I know in the early days of me doing portraits, I would have had more success, even though they were correctly exposed. I think I'd have had more success and not had so much middle distance staring and hello, is there anything going on behind those eyes kind of things, if I had slowed down and spent more time talking to the people. All right. So slow down, take fewer photographs. Perfect example of this for me is this guy here that I photographed, again, from that veteran series, because that is where I learned the most, because I was out there, like I said, the old saying of in the field, out there with real people in all kinds of environments, learning on the go almost, because it's so different to taking portraits in a place like a studio where you've got the luxury of space. But this guy here, Valerian Yavorsky, photographed him, didn't use any kind of the World War II kind of memorabilia, his medals, his jacket, stuff like that. This was Valerian. Wonderful, wonderful man. And I remember sitting and talking to Valerian. All my equipment had left in the car, the flash, the backgrounds, everything was just left in the car so that I could come in and spend time talking to him. And I remember as we were talking, he's telling me about his life story, about when he was a young boy living in Poland, and how the Russians came along to his village in the nighttime, took him and his family and other families from the village away to a forced labor camp. Just horrific, absolutely horrific time. Later life, he escapes. He then joins the military, and he just has the most incredible military history, just unbelievable history. But part of what I did with this process was taking these pictures. I always gave them a print. That was the whole idea behind this, was to give them a print, and I would visit them. I wouldn't just send it. I would send a physical print in a mount to go and take it to them. And I did that with Valerian. I went to see him the one after I'd taken the shoot, about a week or two later, took his portrait. And then about a week later, I remember I was sat in the front room with my wife watching television one evening. My mobile phone, which is never far away from me, is on the coffee table in front, and then the screen lights up. I've got an email. And I checked the email, and this is the email. Hopefully you can read this on your screens here. It's from the lady who originally introduced me to Valerian, to Valek. But she's writing to tell me, and this is about a week after I'd sent him his picture, or taken his picture to him. She was telling me that they were heartbroken because he'd passed away. And stupidly, this is something that I never even envisaged happening when I actually took on this project, photographing these very elderly people for this World War II veterans portrait series. Never even crossed my mind that I would experience this loss. But Valerian was the first one that passed away from the project once I'd taken his portrait. And it really did take the wind out of my sails. It really shook me. But once I'd reread the email, I composed myself and reread the email, and I looked at it again, there was a few things I noticed about it. The first one was where Maria, the lady, says to me that it's a beautiful image and so incredibly special and important. And let's face it, what photographer who's taken a portrait wouldn't just feel great to see that, to know that that's how they feel about your portrait. But the most important thing to me was this, when she said this: thank you for spending time with him. And that is purely because of becoming comfortable with the technicals. That long process for me, it might be different for you, but that long process for me of getting used to the kind of technicals where I could adapt. And it was just something that just happened. It was easy, you know what I mean? Because I'd done it so often, again and again and again, that same lighting setup. That's some of the best advice I was ever given, years ago when I kind of first started out, about getting a style as well. How do you get a style? I remember a great friend of mine, you'll know him, Joel Grimes, gave me the advice of getting a project. He said, Glyn, have a project, but when you have a project, make sure that you do at least 20 images, whatever it is, you do it 20 times. Because if you do whatever it is that you do 20 times, by the time you've done it that often, you become very comfortable and familiar with it, and you can pull it out of the bag at any time because you just know the process. So for me, it was using a one light setup, that I would do the same lighting over and over and over again. And like Joel said, I became comfortable with it. I'm not going to say I mastered it, because that's, there's always more to learn, like I said, but I became very comfortable with it. And because of that, I was able, like Maria says there, to spend time with him, because I knew what I was doing. So the other thing that is really important to me when I'm trying to capture that portrait and not take a photograph is eye contact. Eye contact is a massive thing. And that's one of the reasons why I use a tripod. I'll use a tripod when I'm using a traditional flash, and I'll use a tripod when I'm using, like I am now, the constant light. Okay. The process, the reason why I'm using the tripod is exactly the same. It's not to ensure that I get, a super sharp image, because the settings that I'm generally using, the image is going to be sharp anyway. The focus is going to be bang on, because I don't care what brand of camera you're using, they're all good these days. Let's face it, autofocus, eye autofocus across the brands is incredible, absolutely incredible. So eye contact for me is a huge thing. So you can see here, what I would do is I'd have my camera on a tripod. I'd spend the time talking to them, so that when it came to, and this is what I do regardless of what portrait I'm taking. It doesn't have to be a veteran. It could be anybody. It could be my friend Anthony, like I photographed recently. The camera's on a tripod, we're engaging. And the reason for that is it gives Anthony something to or the person something to focus on. But also I can remain above the camera, just slightly above it, just so that the person in front can see my eyes and my finger can rest on that shutter. Because I learned that the minute I went behind that camera, it then changed. Bearing in mind now, I'm not photographing models, people who are expecting and comfortable being photographed, photographing real, everyday people, and I want to get their character and personality out of them. But the minute I went behind the camera, all that work beforehand of chatting to them just kind of went through the window. It made no difference. So trust your kit is what I'm saying. Your cameras, no matter what brand, are good. So you can see here, perfect example when I'm taking a portrait. Camera's on a tripod, I'm above it, still maintaining that eye contact with the subject in front of me. And that's a big thing for them. There's not that kind of, they don't feel so anxious when they're having a picture taken when you're still maintaining the eye contact. Again, this is the example there, a guy called Reg Charles, wonderful man. Again, sadly, no longer with us. So your kit is kind of, and this is my attitude. My kit now is no longer just my kit. My kit is my assistant. Years ago, there was times when I would be constantly checking after every picture I've taken. Is it okay? How's it looking? But now I kind of know, because again, I'm comfortable with the technicals. I know where the lighting's going, especially with the constant, because what you see is what you get. I know my camera is going to be nailing the focus. It's going to be bang on with the eyes. So I trust it. So really my camera, my kit, all of my stuff is now my assistant, because it's doing stuff for me and I can trust it. Although there's something else, which is a bit of a side note here about when it comes to taking portraits. I clearly remember going back years ago when I wasn't as comfortable with the technicals, that I struggled to hide that. No matter how I thought I was disguising that panic, that inner panic, clearly my face was showing it, because my kind of stress, my anxiety and all that kind of stuff was being reflected onto them. And, here's me getting all flustered, trying to make sure everything's working right and checking settings and doing exposure, using a light meter and all this kind of stuff. And then I just stop and say, okay, now look relaxed. It ain't going to work, because the way I am is going to reflect onto them. And that's what this thing called Batari's box is all about. This is something that's taught in the world of conflict management. And it goes like this. It goes, my attitude affects my behavior, which makes sense. My behavior affects your attitude, which in turn affects your behavior. And this is an ongoing thing. So if you're feeling anxious and stressed and kind of, sort of, oh my God, what's going on? That's going to reflect in your behavior. They're going to see that. That's going to reflect on them, and it's going to make their behavior change. So if you're trying to capture if you're trying to capture a portrait, not a photograph, a portrait where you want that real person to come through, if this is going on and it ain't good, you're never going to get it. You're never going to get it. So again, by becoming comfortable with the technicals, like I was when I was using Flash, or I am when I'm using Flash, this changes. Even more so when you're using constant light, because it is just all that kind of stress of the technicals just seem to disappear. You turn it on, you position it, you dial your settings in, you go. What you see is what you get. What you see with the naked eye is what the camera captures. There's no concerns about triggering, no nothing. It just works. It just works. Another little thing which I found works well with taking portraits is I call it at and past. So I get people to take pictures of people looking at the camera and looking past the camera. And what I mean by this is it's very difficult, I've found, with the amount of portraits I've taken, it's very difficult to know who looks better when they're looking at the camera or when they're looking past it. And they do. There are some people out there that have something about them that looks good when they're looking straight down the lens. But there's something about some other people, their personality, the way they hold themselves, whatever. I don't know what it is. But when they're looking past the camera, it has so much more impact. It really does. Here's examples here. This guy here, this is my friend Keith, my friend Anthony, looking straight at the camera. It works for them. But then we've got these veterans here where they were looking past the camera. And, there were veterans that I found looked best looking at, but these veterans in particular seem to look better looking past. So what I do with this is, when I'm taking portraits, it's all set up, everything's nice and calm because we understand the technicals, we know it's all working, is I'll get them to just look. I'm above the camera, like I said, fingers on the shutter, get them to look down the lens and take a portrait. And then what I'll do is I'll kind of use my hand and say, look at my fingers here. And I'll put it to the side and say, right, just point your nose, your eyes, and your face towards my fingers here and try to look through my fingers. And when they're doing that, I'll take a shot. And I'll move my hand down, take another shot, take it a bit lower, take another shot. And I'll repeat that process on the other side. So when it comes to looking at the images later on in, say, Lightroom, what I used to do was look at them individually. And I'd go through, flag them, pick them, reject them, whatever. But now what I do in Lightroom is I'll have them all there. All the pictures I've took from this portrait shoot in a grid view, all those squares in a grid view. And the weird thing is, you've got to try this. If you've never done it, you've got to try it. When you do that, it's almost like a big arrow comes onto the screen and goes, that one, that's the one that works best for this person. And it's kind of strange. Sometimes they're looking at the camera. Sometimes it just happens that the person I photograph is looking past, but that one seems to work. So give that a go if you've never tried it. Something else is to show them. Do you have the confidence? Because there's so many people that do and so many people that don't. Do you show people the pictures that you're taking of them as you're taking them? Now, I know people that will say they don't do that because they don't want the person they're photographing to see the pictures before they're edited and all that. There's all manner of different reasons. But I do show people the pictures as I'm taking them because I'm always shooting tethered. So my message here is show them, but don't compliment them. And what I mean by that is how I used to do it was this. I'd be tethered into my laptop. If I was photographing you, I'd be tethered into the laptop and I'd turn the laptop round midway through the shoot and go, look at these. You look incredible. You look absolutely amazing. You're killing it. Now, if I said that to a model, they would be jumping for joy. They'd love it. They'd lap it up. But I've told you already, I'm not photographing models. I'm photographing real people, people that aren't necessarily so comfortable in front of the camera, and I'm trying to capture them. If I then started to, what I thought was working, tell them how good they looked, honestly, pretty much 99 times out of 100, I'd get the reaction where they started to feel a bit, oh, no, I don't know. I don't like being photographed. Oh, no, look, well, I've got one eye slightly high. Oh, no, don't like that. And it would ruin the rest of the photo shoot. So it almost had, it had the opposite effect of what I wanted. I'd be trying to compliment them, but it had the reverse effect. So now what I do is I still show them the actual portraits as I'm doing it, but instead of complimenting them, what I do is I go, look, I'm really happy. Look, the lighting on these is coming out fantastic. Really happy with how these are turning out. And it's almost like something psychological going on here because they see me and hear me complimenting what I'm doing. And because I'm complimenting me and I'm happy with what I'm doing, it is uncanny how people seem to change. And then they're more happy to have their pictures taken because people generally, they want to please you. So because I'm not saying how good they look, I'm happy with what I'm doing, they're more than happy to sit there. It's kind of like mind games, I guess, but it really, really works. So more examples there when people are looking straight at the camera. The big one, though, I think is this one, listening, spending time to listen. I've already mentioned about that earlier on, about when you become comfortable with the technicals, that you can then do what I believe you should be doing as a portrait photographer. And that is his people skills. That's what it's all about. The technicals, everything, that should be in the bag. We trust the kit. We know what to do. We know how to position the light. We know what settings to dial in. Anybody can be taught that. But I believe the real skills of a portrait photographer are people skills. And the biggest one of all is to listen. And as the old saying goes, you've got two ears and one mouth, use them in that proportion. And a perfect example was this guy here. I did have a video of this guy, but I don't want to play the video. But just to give you a quick backstory on this guy, a guy called John Sleep. He'd suffered with post-traumatic stress disorder his entire life since the war. So we're talking John sadly passed away 2 years ago. So we're talking 77 years of his life he suffered with post-traumatic stress disorder. And when I go to photograph John, as I'm talking to him about everything except experiences during the war, because obviously that's not a way to start a conversation. You just talk about anything, family. What was it like to be in the parachute regiment, which John was in? What was his training like? Any funny people he remembers and experiences, all that kind of stuff. Anything but talking about the horrible, gory stuff. But as he was talking, he was always on the edge, teetering on the edge of crying. So clearly this post-traumatic stress was displaying itself. So I didn't want to use a traditional flash because I thought that if I used a traditional flash on him, it might cause some kind of an adverse reaction. He might have a bit of a flashback, and it's okay for me to do that. I come from my happy home. I come and take his portrait. I get what I wanted from it. I then leave this very elderly man in a state of distress. That just could not happen. So it just so happened that this was the first time I ever used constant light, and it was more out of necessity as opposed to a desire. Because what I had in the car with me, as well as my strobes, my traditional flashes, was a video light, because I do a lot of video work. And I just so happened to have a video light in there as well. So I brought that in. I turned it on, and I kind of did a down and dirty way of putting the modifier onto it. I managed to get it onto that so that the light from this video light, which wasn't the correct shape, did go into the modifier so I could then illuminate John. Great thing was that constant light was on permanently. John sits down in the chair. I get behind my tripod. I'm above the camera looking at him. And again, what I see is what I get. John's not going to get this sudden flash going off, which could potentially, I didn't know if it would or wouldn't, but I didn't want to risk the chance that it could have. There was no concern about any flashes going off. So as well as that, other little things I did with John, because I didn't really want him to know I was taking a picture, I turned on silent shutter. Again, something else that I've never done. I've never used silent shutter on my camera. I'm not a wedding photographer. I've not had to concern myself with that, which I guess is what most people who are wedding photographers would get used out of that. I never had to, but I did. And I plugged in a cable release so that I was not like this, taking the pictures in front of John. So I just got John talking about some pleasant things that, I knew he could talk a lot about. And as he's talking, I've got the cable release in my hands, and I'm just every now and again at the right moment, just taking a shot. There's no flash, there's no click, there's no nothing. He has no idea. And that's how I managed to capture this portrait. But when it comes to people skills, not all of us are so confident when we're talking to people that we don't know. A lot of times you're photographing people, it could be the first time you've ever met them. So you've got a lot to think about. All the technical stuff is one thing to think about. On how on earth just actually talk to somebody as well. This is proper multitasking now. But I remember being told these 4 letters. I forget who it was who told me, but obviously a very wise person. But I always remember them telling me that when you've got somebody in front of you, just imagine they have these 4 letters on their forehead. MMFI. Make me feel important. If you don't know what to talk about them. Talk about life. Talk about their interests, their works, their families, their interests. You name it, whatever. Just talk about them. People love to talk about them. And once you get them talking, that will then naturally lead on. But a great starting point. MMFI, make me feel important. So wrapping that part up there, things that I learned, just to sort of recap it. The first one, slow down. Second one, eye contact, maintaining that eye contact. Don't be hiding behind the camera. Look at and past. Give it a try. If you've never done it, give it a try. Honestly, I think you'll be amazed when you look at all the images in there, like in grid view, if you use Lightroom. You'll see all the different pictures and it'll just jump out at you, the one that works. Compliment you, don't compliment them when it comes to showing them the portraits. They'll be much more inclined to want to have more pictures taken. That's what I found anyway. And then lastly, probably most of all, this should probably be right at the top of the list there. Listen to them. But like I've said, the whole overriding message here about all of this is being able to do all of this when you are comfortable with the technicals. So I'm kind of, I hope as we've gone through this, because obviously before I mentioned all of these 5 different points, I mentioned about starting to use the constant light. Can you see now how constant light would enable this to be such an easier process? Not to have to go through all that kind of learning almost. And that's why it almost feels like cheating doing this. But the constant light, if I think about all those veterans portraits, over 111 portraits, I think it is in total, how much of a different experience it would have been had I been using constant light at the time with all of them, not just John's sleep. But like I said, the light that I'm using is this one, the L60B. And I've got a couple of videos I want to show you now because as well as using it with my main camera, I've also tried it out because it is constant light. I've also tried it out by taking a few portraits with my mobile phone just as an experiment to see, because it's going to, the mobile phone will also capture the light that's in front of it. And because the constant light's there, we can use these as well with the mobile phones. And a great friend of mine, Lisa Carney, and I only realized this the other day when I was speaking to her, she now uses one of these lights because she saw me using them to photograph people with my iPhone. And Lisa is completely an iPhone photographer. That is her camera, and her portraits are insanely good. And she's now using an L60B, a constant light, which is great to hear. But I did the actual. There's a portrait I've taken. Again, not wanting this to sound in any way like a sales pitch, but a few years ago I did a course showing how I create these timeless portraits. And it was a breakdown of the whole process, the photography and the retouching to create portraits that were like the veterans' portraits, timeless portraits that you could look at in years to come and not really be able to pinpoint the year that they were taken. Because obviously there are certain lighting styles that you can say, oh, I remember that was being done in X period or whatever. But this is like the updated portrait that I did, taken using constant light. So what I want to do now is just play you, just for a few minutes, one of the videos from this update that I provided to people to show you now how I explain using the constant light and how it's been such a difference using it from how I first did it for this particular style.
Now, being completely honest with you, this photo shoot compared to the original was a lot easier. Not that it's a difficult photo shoot by any means, but using the constant light changed everything. The position of the light and how we position it I've talked about in detail already in the original content. And now using the constant light, I wanted the exact same. However, doing so was easier because I could see it. Last time I was using a speed light, which does have a modeling light option, but can drain those little batteries very quickly, so I tend to avoid using it. This time, using the constant light, I didn't have to draw that imaginary line from the edge of the softbox to Anthony, because when the light was on, I could see exactly where it was landing. The other main difference was that because I was using constant light, I needed to control the ambient light in the room, basically any light that wasn't contributing to the picture itself. And I explained a few videos back that I turned off the lights in the room, but if I wanted a little more detail in those shadow areas, it would have been great to have that room light, which was daylight balanced, maybe on a dimmer switch so that I could also dial that in to exactly what I wanted. You can see, just like before, my camera is on a tripod and that I'm tethered into my iPad and Capture One. Now, I used a 24 to 70mm lens this time, but funnily enough, without even realizing it, I used it at 55mm, just like before in the original content when I used a 55mm prime lens. So clearly there's something about that focal length that I love for the look it gives for upper body, 3/4 and full length portraits. Now, as for camera settings, here's what I ended up using. An aperture of f4, shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, and an ISO of 2500. Now, the ISO, just like before, was used to bring more detail in those shadow areas, because even though a silver reflector was being used, it needed a bit more, and obviously I'm only using one light. And because Anthony was still, I could have maybe lowered the shutter speed a touch to allow for slightly less ISO. But to be perfectly honest with you, modern day cameras are excellent at handling high ISO and producing minimal noise, and noise which is very easy to deal with during the retouching process. I was also shooting in manual so as to guarantee no possibility of a shift in exposure between shots. Changing it up from the original timeless portrait, this time I went for a standing portrait of Anthony. And this is the out of camera raw file, and here is the final retouched portrait that we'll be going through next.
So yeah, made a huge difference when it came to actually taking that particular portrait there. But like I mentioned, something else that I've tried with this, because it is just, you know, what you see is what you get, no matter what you take a picture with, you know, be it your DSLR, your mirrorless, or your mobile device, like your iPhone, like I use, you're going to capture it because it will see it. And this here is an example. Now, what I did was I thought it'd just be fun to see how far have we come when it comes to taking portraits with our mobile phones. So let's face it, I know that we're not in the position where we can say that the mobile phones are equal to the quality of our mirrorless. I would be pretty annoyed at the moment, actually, with the money that I know I've spent on kit, to think that my phone was as good as when it comes to file quality, as my main camera. But this here is the portrait that I took using my Sony. So this is a Sony with, I believe it was a 55mm lens. So really sharp, loved it. However, I did the same setup. I left everything as it was, but I took the camera off the tripod. I put in a mobile phone holder on the tripod, and I put my mobile into it and took the same portrait and the same lighting. And this is the kind of picture that came out. So yes, there's a difference, but I think it's impressive to think where we've come from. But the fact is, I can use the constant light to create lit portraits with my mobile. So very, very exciting times. We're looking at way things are advancing when it comes to mobile kind of things as well. But one other little thing I wanted to mention about with regards to this L60, without it meaning to sound like a sales pitch, is the ease of use. That's obviously the ease of use is the big thing. But also the fact is how I can use my mobile device with it to control it. Because there's the Westcott app allows you to connect ridiculously quickly. You can just literally press one button, it connects to the L60. You can then control the power of it, the color temperature of it. And there's also some special effects in there for folks who like to do videos. So you can have the flash going off like it's creating like a lighting effect, like a TV. And I think there's two others, which I've kind of forgotten for the moment. But there's lighting effects you can use for video as well, which very, very clever. But here's a 30-second video just to show you the controls that you've got within that mobile phone app.
To control the power output and the temperature, and even some special lighting effects for when using it with video, you can either dial that in using the controls on the light itself or by using the app on your phone, which is what I did, and so saved me from going back and forth to change settings.
So there you go. Very, very simple. So the things I love about this L60, I think you can tell that I'm enthused by it and I really like it. And it really is what I'm using pretty much most of the time now, unless I'm going outdoors where I need to burn that sky down like I showed earlier on, or when I'm taking pictures where there is considerable movement, because that then the constant light, it wouldn't be fit for purpose. That's when I jump over to using my other lights, like my speed light, my FJ200, or my FJ400, if I needed that bit more oomph to the light. But what I do love about this L60 is the fact that the ease of use, literally, I've said it so many times, I know, what you see is what you get. I'm excited by it. That's probably coming across. I genuinely am excited about it. It has made me, it's reinvigorated me. Although I was excited anyway, it's kind of really wanted to make me want to get out there and create more. And because it's just so simple to use. It really, really is. It's relaxed. You know, there's no concern about it. Taking those pictures there, getting stressed out about settings. You just dial in the settings on your camera. The light's there. You can dial it up, dial it down, change ISO if you want to bring more detail into the shadow areas and take a shot. So for the person taking the pictures and using it, it's a very relaxed experience. But also on the flip side of it, it's a relaxing experience for the person who's being photographed. Because, you know, it can be quite a daunting thing having again, I'm talking about, you know, people who aren't models here primarily, but it's a daunting thing having this big flash go off. It can be quite a shock sometimes to people. And, you know, there are, like I said, people out there with superpowers who seem to be able to blink at the moment that flash is going off so that you always catch them with their eyes closed. Or they then start to kind of preempt it happening. They get ready for it. And it just, yeah, you don't get that when using the constant light. It's just there. It's very relaxed. And because it's LED, there's no heat. It's just comfortable, really, really comfortable. Modifiers. I haven't had to spend any more money on modifiers. The modifiers I'm already using with my traditional flashes fit on to the L60, which, like I said in the video there, is the size of a fizzy drinks can. And it's very, very light. And the portability of it. Now, I'm mainly at the moment, I'm using it mains powered. So I have to be careful when I'm kind of stepping around it. But one thing I do want to do with it is get the battery adapter for it so I can actually have it handheld then, because that then, when I'm going out taking portraits, will be a lot easier. I can give it to a friend. They can literally hold it in position. I don't have to worry about so much about having like a boom arm. They can hold it there. And because it's so light, it'll be no effort for them to do that. So looking forward to trying out more kind of stuff with that as well. But even mains powered, it's pretty damn good, pretty damn good. But there you go. That's me. I guess at some point now we're going to see if there's any, well, look at that for timing. You'd almost think this was rehearsed. We're going to jump over to see if there are any questions, but see if I can find my cursor. Where's my cursor gone? So I can stop screen sharing. There we go. Stop sharing. And I'm back.
There you are. You're back. I just want to tell you, Glyn, that I have my FJ400 case right there.
Uh-huh.
But my wife is right there. And on my website now, I got the L60B pulled up. And I'm like, how do I buy it while I'm getting stared at, knowing that I got a whole case of gear right there?
Do you know what? A little tip. Hopefully she can't hear you. You don't say you're buying it. You're investing.
There we go. I'm investing. Making an investment. That was all. Look, you made it look so easy for me. And again, lifelong strobe. I still use strobes.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, and I'll open it up for the people out there. If you guys do have questions, please get them in. A special hello to everybody in there in the UK watching on YouTube. So they're not eating dinner. They're not going to sleep. They're in YouTube right now, Glyn. What about the effect on the subjects? Do you notice an effect on the subjects with the continuous light? I know you made a great point of how comfortable you are in that, you know, that kind of shifting over to the subject.
Yeah.
In terms of the lighting, is the continuous lighting, is it more difficult because the light is constantly on, or is it easier because they feel you at ease? Is there any effect of the light that has on your portrait subjects?
It does, but I got to say, my only experience with all the people I've photographed with it so far is a positive impact on them. You know, there's number one, I mentioned it just a moment ago. Obviously, with it being LED, there's no heat from it, so that's one thing you haven't got to concern yourself about. With it's not like having a stage light constantly on you. The fact that it can be bright, yes, that could potentially be something with this bright light constantly on. I mean, I've got like a video light, as you have. You know, got a video light above you now. When you first put it on, you may be a bit like that, but then you adapt very, very quickly. So now I've got this bright light, which it's not impacting me whatsoever. You know what I mean? So I guess that's kind of what it's like for the people in front of the light source. Initially, when it's on, then yeah. But, you know, this can go from 0 to 100. It's a 60-watt light, but you're not going to be using it all the time. You're going to be, I mean, like those portraits there, they're like 30% power.
Wow.
You know, so, and that is plenty. And I am somebody who will bring up that ISO because, like, you know, like I said, you know, before, that modern day cameras, they can deal with it. It's not an issue. yeah, you know, if we rewound to my first camera, which is a Nikon D800, no, Nikon D200 rather, if I use that at 800 ISO, forget it. It was just like, it was pixel city. It was awful. Whereas now, you know, I've gone up to 2,500 and sometimes beyond. The only reason really I would ever want to use like a denoise on that is because the noise that's in there is color noise. It's not monochromatic. But apart from that, no. So long answer to a quick question there, wasn't it? But no, it doesn't impact them. I mean, in a positive way, I've found.
Definitely, definitely. Question coming in from Edwin, joining us on YouTube. How do you compare the light output on the continuous lights? Is there a way to compare like a guide number to compare it to strobes? What can someone expect? So from the L60B, how is this going to work for taking it outside, trying to overpower the sun? What can people expect with this?
Don't even go there. My experience is don't even go there. If you're going to be going outside where you've got the outside light, you need to burn down and get some detail in the sky and what have you. You're not going to do that with a constant light. It really is a case of what's fit for purpose. Mm-hmm. You know, we've got, certainly for outdoor, I will always be using the strobe. They've got much more oomph to them. They can, you know, you can use a high-speed sync and you can deal with those environments. For indoor stuff, with portraits, for still life, for food, for macro, anything like that, this is just perfect. It really is. But don't expect to take the ease of taking the indoor portrait with this constant light and just going outdoors. Not at all. It's like, you know, imagine taking a torch outside on a bright day and using it. What's the point? What's the point?
There's always a give and a take.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how often do you mix? Do you ever mix in the continuous with the strobe? Do you use the strobe as like to stack like mood lighting or anything? Or is it really one?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm not somebody who tends to do that. And I don't generally, although there were some pictures early on that I showed where I'd used a few lights. Generally, I am somebody who likes to use one light, although I've got another. This is the thing with these L60s, they're addictive. I've got 2 more now. So I've got 3 of these things, but I just had a little bit of kicker light and stuff like that. But no, I don't sort of generally mix them in too much, but it is very easy to do it because you just bring them in, you turn them on, you bring it, and you can see it. You know what I mean? What you want to have is just there. And if you want to make it a bit cooler, you can dial it in because obviously you can change the temperature of it on the fly. And it's just like, oh, what? I love it. I mean, I've mixed in heater lights. That picture there that I showed you with the Sony and the iPhone, that warm light against the wall was a heater. Because I'm using constant light, the shutter speed and everything, I've got the heater turned towards the wood, and that's giving the light on there. Then I'm using the constant light on my friend Ian. So that there is balancing it, but I wasn't even using a proper light source. It was a heater. It just works. Yeah.
Well, and going back to the temperature thing, you're right. It's even when you're using strobes, you would think, okay, it's just popping. It's just popping. That popping after 15 minutes is you're starting to sweat. It gets really hot under those lights. It doesn't matter if they're not continuous. It's still popping a heck of a lot more power at you. So yeah, it's keeping your subjects more cool, more relaxed, more calm. Definitely makes sense. Daryl is asking if it comes with a Bowens mount.
What's the mount? Let me have a quick. Actually, I don't know. Is it a Bowens mount? I'm not sure. Hold on a second. It's got. Here's one I prepared earlier.
There you go.
I got one just here. So it comes with. Let's have a look here. So
it'll come with like a little reflector.
There you go. So you got the reflector, you got the adapter here that you then put into it so that you can put all your rapid box switch fittings on. But yeah, that is the Bowens fit. So
I could use my same kit, my FJ400 kit. It's pretty much just going to be, I'm just buying another light because I have everything else that is going to, the modifiers is going to go right on my rapid boxes, my Octas.
Have you got yours, the rapid box ones where you can just, yeah. They do. Now, this is an interesting thing, actually, because I remember when I first got it, I was speaking to Brandon at Westcott because he could see how, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And he goes, whoa, calm down. He said, my advice, he says, because of the power of it, you might want to think about using it with the medium-sized Octa. Don't go to the really, really big one. But me being me, I was like, I wonder what it would be like with the big Octa. Worked fine. I mean, that one of those pictures I showed there, the guy with the suit on, my friend Anthony, that's the large Octa. And I was able to say, Yeah. I was illuminating it fine. I think it's probably because it was in nice and close, and I was, it wasn't a full length shot. You might get a bit of fall off if it was to do a full length, but I don't know. I found that to be fine. It's absolutely fine. So I genuinely could not be happier with using it, and it is just it is like starting all over again. That excitement has just come back again. I love it.
It's easy, man. And
It is. It's
seeing
easy. It's too
this
easy.
is why we love seeing how the pictures are made, because you read my mind. I saw that huge octa and I'm like, is it enough power to push through? But then when you think about it, like you said, you pair everything together. You don't need full power. You don't need to shoot wide open at ISO 100. It's like, go to ISO 1600, give it a little bit of a kick of light. If you're not using full body, you can make it work. It's getting creative and knowing the relationship of how everything works together.
Absolutely, yeah.
See, I'm learning. I was taking notes over here. I'm picking it up, man. Glyn, this was great, man. Look, we're gonna get your website, your YouTube dropped into the comments section there. I do see I was just about to take us out, but Brian snuck a question in, so we definitely want to get to this because this is a good question here. Can you use gels with the L60B? And could you do a 2 light setup, 1 regular, 1 gel? Do you ever get creative with gels?
I don't, but yes, you could. There is absolutely no reason why you couldn't use gels. It depends what kind of color you want to go for, I guess. But if you just use the L60 as it is, you can take it to really cool. I was kind of trying to show it when I was showing the app on that one particular video there. You can see it going really cool and really warm. So you've got a whole spectrum there that you can change in the temperature there. But if you want to put other gels on, absolutely you could, because let's face it, it's a cold light. It's not going to get hot. You've got no concern about putting any gels over the top there. So yeah, fill your boots. Go for it.
What do you find do you have any modifier that you use more than others, or do you just go reflector? What's your most common setup for it?
At the moment with what I'm doing is my most common modifiers. There's 2. I'm using the large octa because I like to do that to cover the kind of down to maybe like the knee height upwards. Okay. But when I'm doing the close-in portraits, I love the 24-inch Beauty Dish. Love it. Absolutely love that. The one I'm using, because I know there's 2 different ones, I'm using the Joel Grimes one, the one branded by Joel. And it's just perfect because that packs down to hardly anything. That's really small and portable. The light itself is really portable. I mean, it just makes everything mobile nowadays. Everything's mobile, isn't it? Even your photography kit now has gone. There's a garage full of kit out there not being used, and I've just reduced it to this one bag: modifier, reflector, and camera. Thank you very much. Simple. I haven't got to worry about batteries for triggers. Nothing. It's brilliant.
I'd say I wish I would have spoken to you before I got my modifiers, because I have neither of those modifiers, and I gotta up my kit there. So I'm gonna look into that big octa.
Cool.
And we'll make it happen here. But Glyn, always good having you on. Huge thank you to you and the entire team at Westcott for making this happen. We're going to get Glyn's links dropped in there for those of you who are not up on it. Just check out our YouTube page at B&H Event Space. We'll drop his YouTube link, website, all that good stuff on there. And to everybody else, thanks for joining us. This has been another edition of the B&H Event Space. Catch y'all next time.